Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Tonight, I'd like to update the American people on the international effort that we have led in Libya, what we've done, what we plan to do, and why this matters to us. America led an effort with our allies at the United Nations Security Council to pass a historic resolution that authorized a no-fly zone to stop the regime's attacks from the air and further authorized all necessary measures to protect.
He directly went against what he campaigned on. I guess what amazes me is that he said he consulted people. He consulted people at the UN, he consulted people in Arab countries, he consulted people at NATO, but he did not consult Congress. And I really, really think that this is a very big problem for him. Even during the Bush years, you know, Bush came to Congress before he went into Afghanistan and before he went into Iraq. Wasn't a declaration of the war, but at very least he came to Congress first.
Either you're with us, either you love freedom and with nations which embrace freedom, or you're with the enemy. There's no in between. You're either with us or you're with the enemy. That's clear. I will continue to make that clear.
The international community offered Gaddafi a final chance to stop his campaign of killing or face the consequences.
The pictures are truly shocking and gut-wrenching, too graphic, in fact, for us to show. Rolling Stone magazine has just released several new photos allegedly taken by the so-called Kill Team, a rogue U.S. striker group in Afghanistan that is on trial for the murder of civilians.
Some nations may be able to turn a blind eye to atrocities in other countries. The United States of America is different. And as president, I refuse to wait for the images of slaughter and mass graves before taking action.
In November 2001, as many as 2,000 prisoners are believed to have been murdered by U.S. allied Afghan troops and buried in a mass grave in Dasht Jalali, Afghanistan. These Afghan troops were operating jointly with American forces. The New York Times has revealed that the Bush administration blocked at least 3 separate investigations into these alleged war crimes. This revelation comes after nearly 8 years of advocacy and investigation by Physicians for Human Rights. Citing a former FBI agent and other sources, The Times reports that beginning in 2002, senior Bush administration officials obstructed a series of criminal probes by the FBI, Defense Department, and State Department. This story begins in northern Afghanistan, November 2001, when thousands of Taliban and foreign fighters surrendered to U.S. Special Forces and the troops of Afghan warlord General Abdul Rashid Dostum, a notoriously brutal U.S. ally in the Northern Alliance. The prisoners were promised they would not be harmed.
Instead, Dostum packed them in shipping containers where they were carried in a convoy through the desert. According to U.S. government documents obtained by PHR, up to 2,000 people died during that convoy. They were buried at a place called Dasht Jalali, which is a mass grave site near Shebregan, Afghanistan.
Some nations may be able to turn a blind eye to atrocities in other countries. The United States of America is different. And as president, I refuse to wait for the images of slaughter and mass graves before taking action. Moreover, America has an important strategic interest in preventing Gaddafi from overrunning those who oppose him.
In my opinion, any future defense secretary who advises the president to again send a big American land army into Asia or into the Middle East or Africa should have his head examined, as General MacArthur so delicately put it.
The democratic impulses that are dawning across the region would be eclipsed by the darkest form of dictatorship, as repressive leaders concluded that violence is the best strategy to cling to power. The writ of the United Nations Security Council would have been shown to be little more than empty words, crippling that institution's future credibility to uphold global peace and security. So while I will never minimize the costs involved in military action, I am convinced that a failure to act in Libya would have carried a far greater price for America. Now, just as there are those who've argued against intervention in Libya,
ladies and gentlemen, I drafted an outline of what I think the constitutional limitations had on the President of the War Clause. I went to 5 leading scholars, constitutional scholars, and they drafted a treatise for me. It's being distributed to every senator. And I want to make it clear, and I made it clear to the President, that if he takes this nation to war in Iran without congressional approval, I will make it my business to impeach him. That's a fact. That is a fact.
Now, just as there are those who've argued against intervention in Libya, there are others who've suggested that we broaden our military mission beyond the task of protecting the Libyan people and do whatever it takes to bring down Gaddafi and usher in a new government. Of course, there is no question that Libya and the world would be better off with Gaddafi out of power. I, along with many other world leaders, have embraced that goal and will actively pursue it through non-military means.
Well, with half the population, as I see it, on his side, Libya really does look like becoming a new Iraq. I presume we'll be seeing depleted uranium missiles thrown by the benevolent humanitarian Western aircraft onto that population there.
In Desert Storm. Now they say their children are paying the heart-wrenching price. You will never forget the children of the storm.
But it should be clear to those around Gaddafi and to every Libyan that history is not on Gaddafi's side. With the time and space that we have provided for the Libyan people, they will be able to determine their own destiny. And that is how it should be.
Just how justified are such humanitarian missions like we saw then, maybe like we're seeing now?
I would say that such interventions are never justified because they represent a huge investment on the part of those intervening, and they only justify themselves in terms of their ability to achieve the aims of the interveners, which are always strategic, designed to position themselves into occupation positions in strategically vital areas of the world. So in terms of how they benefit the local population, the answer is not at all. In fact, they're always very negative. Afghanistan in 1979, the intervention then has led to 30 years and still ongoing instability. Kosovo in 1999, still a fake state of desperate poverty and desperate crime in all that entire area. Bosnia was an opportunity for peace and diplomacy. They didn't take it, and a war ensued there as well. Iraq, we know, another nightmare. We have, and now we're building up to a new Iraq in Libya. Basically, these interventions have never led to successful conclusions. They lead to open-ended Western occupations and regional instability on a continuing basis designed to justify those occupations. That's what they're about.
So you're saying lessons have not been learned along the line by the US and allied forces from these previous military campaigns?
Well, lessons have been learned very well. The people who are doing the campaigns are very well versed.
Yes, this change will make the world more complicated for a time. Progress will be uneven, and change will come differently to different countries.
Strategic, designed to position themselves into occupation positions in strategically vital areas of the world.
The United States will not be able to dictate the pace and scope of this change.
Now, in the case of Libya, the Libyan foreign minister accepted the resolution as it was passed the other day and said that he demanded observers to monitor the ceasefire straight away. Why wasn't that invitation taken up? Because if we want a genuine dialogue, as the resolution called for, if we want peace and an end to violence, then we need a ceasefire, we need dialogue between the parties. Bear in mind that in Western countries, it takes 5 years to enable regime change, and it's the outcome of a long process of dialogue. Over in Libya and the Middle East, it seems that the expectation is to create regime change in 5 days and to do it at the point of a Tomahawk cruise missile.
Supplies of food and fuel were choked off. Water for hundreds of thousands of people in Misrata was shut off. Cities and towns were shelled, mosques were destroyed, and apartment buildings reduced to rubble. Military jets and helicopter gunships were unleashed upon people who had no means to defend themselves against assaults from the air.
Light them all up.
202 traffic, 260.
Come on, fire. Hey, Roger. Keep shoot. Keep shoot.
Bushmaster 2-6. Bushmaster 2-6. We need to move time now.
All right, we just engaged all 8 individuals. Now we got 2 birds. We're still firing. Roger. Got him.
6 is a 2-6. We'll move, but we got this.
Oh, sorry. Well,
bypass.
God damn it, Kyle. All right. I hit my head.
And it's important progress, and it's an important part of our strategy to win in Iraq. Iraq has made incredible political progress. Iraqis are making inspiring progress. Iraq has made incredible political progress. I believe we're making really good progress in Iraq. We're making progress. We're making steady progress. We're making progress. It's slowly but surely making progress. In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed.
6 years since the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq toppled Saddam Hussein's dictatorship, but much of the country is still in ruins with little or no improvement to basic necessities like electricity and water supplies.
Supplies of food and fuel were choked off. Water for hundreds of thousands of people in Misrata was shut off.
People in the electricity ministry and the water resources ministry, they're blaming terrorist bombings for the interruptions in supplies. The people in Iraq know much better.
And how would you compare the situation now to what it was, 6 years ago?
Well, when Saddam Hussein was in charge of Iraq, of course, Iraq had one of the most advanced critical infrastructures in the Middle East, and now it ranks down around where Yemen or Sudan is. It's a dysfunctional system, unfortunately, for the people of Iraq.
And, you mentioned a lot of links between the U.S. government and some of these contractors, but, a lot of money and resources are still going over there. Where is this all going once it reaches Iraq?
It doesn't seem like there's much of a change with these contracts that are being let. Lack of performance on the part of the U.S. contract.
Because wherever people long to be free, they will find a friend in the United States. Ultimately, it is that faith, those ideals, that are the true measure of American leadership. My fellow Americans, I know that at a time of upheaval overseas, when the news is filled with conflict and change, it can be tempting to turn away from the world. And as I've said before,
Libya, moments ago, the president made what would be humorously a hypocritical argument for why America is waging war in Libya, as in it would be funny if lives weren't at stake. He argued that his mission is humanitarian and not military. The mission of war is to kill, and the president ought to know that. But has he forgotten his own values? When he was a senator, he argued that the president does not have the power to wage war without congressional approval unless the target posed an imminent threat to the United States. And just listen to what his own Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates, said when he was asked if Libya is a threat.
Posed an actual or imminent threat to the United States?
No, it was not. It was not a vital national interest to the United States.
So what gives, Mr. President? Why the change of heart? What on earth are we doing over there?
Confronted by this brutal repression and a looming humanitarian crisis, I ordered warships into the Mediterranean. European allies declared their willingness to commit resources to stop the killing.
The official reason for Western involvement, a so-called humanitarian mission, a term coined amid the bombings of 1999.
You go into, you say, well, you can bomb a country because you're coming to save its people. And essentially that was the rationale behind the war in Yugoslavia.
A rationale still relied upon, but widely questioned.
You do not come to the rescue of civilians with bombs and missiles, okay? Bombs and missiles are part of a killing machine, and they inevitably will kill civilians.
The engine of that machine, both then and now, a no-fly zone, fueled in Libya by the additional, all-necessary measures, where the line between the enemy in a foreign land and its civilians often gets blurred. It did in Yugoslavia, with thousands of people killed and close to 1 million displaced.
After the war, when they did a count, they found that U.S. NATO bombs had destroyed 14 tanks in Serbia. 14 tanks. But they had also bombed 437 schools.
A similar scenario is now predicted in Libya.
Some of your colleagues, notably Senator John McCain, Republican from Arizona, I haven't heard his comments on the speech, but before the speech, applauded the president's invasion and said something to the effect of, this is a beautiful opportunity for freedom and democracy.
Well, I'd say it's kind of unclear. You know, when we went in the 1980s, we supported some people called freedom fighters in Afghanistan. Turns out one of the freedom fighters was Osama bin Laden. That didn't turn out so well.
That land over there is yours. You'll go back to it one day because your fight will prevail and you'll have your homes and your mosques back again because your cause is right and God is on your side.
Reagan back in those years helped, open the door for better relations between Washington and Baghdad.
As Saddam Hussein outlined Iraq's ongoing border dispute with Kuwait, Ambassador Glaspie was quite clear that, quote, "We took no position on these Arab affairs," close quote. There would have been no reason for Saddam Hussein not to take this assurance at face value. The U.S. was quite supportive of his invasion and war of aggression against Iran in the 1980s. With this approval from the U.S. government, it wasn't surprising that the invasion occurred. The shock and surprise was how quickly the tables were turned and our friend, Saddam Hussein, all of a sudden became Hitler personified.
We have done so because we know that our own future is safer, our own future is brighter, if more of mankind can live with the bright light of freedom and dignity. Tonight, let us give thanks for the Americans who are serving through these trying times and the coalition that is carrying our effort forward. And let us look to the future with confidence and hope, not only for our own country, but for all those yearning for freedom around the world. Thank you. God bless you. And may God bless the United States of America. Thank you. Thank you.
It's not about justice. It's not about agenda. It's not about mobilizing people. It's about dialing for corporate dollars. These two parties have sold the U.S. government and the American people to the highest bidders.